Hello, welcome again. Welcome to the 988 Crisis Systems Response Training and Technical Assistance webinar on the Policy Academy. My name is Lydia Hernai. I'm one of the project leads on the TTAC, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Um, Before we get started, let's just take a moment to ensure that everyone in the audience is ready and comfortable with the technical aspects of our meeting today. We do have closed captioning enabled for today's webinar, and if at any point during our time together you need some technical assistance, please feel free to send a chat message to the hosts and we'll address that for you. And of course, if you have presentation or questions as we go along the presentation, please also use the chat feature to ask questions as we go. We'll address them either in the moment or at the end, depending on how things go and the flow of the webinar. So please feel free to make use of that feature. We want to hear from you. We're glad you're here, and we want to make sure that you leave with your questions answered. All right, next slide, please. Before we proceed, I just have a couple of disclaimers. First, I would like to note that the views expressed in written conference materials or publications and by speakers and moderators here do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is hosted by SAMHSA's 988 Crisis Systems Response Training and Technical Assistance Center. And just because no one wants to hear me trip through those words for the remainder of the webinar, I'm going to refer that going forward as the TTAC. So SAMHSA has selected Altarum to provide training and technical assistance to support to states and territories, tribal organizations, and community partners across the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline and Crisis Continuum of Care. So along with our partners, W2 Consulting Corporation and Change Matrix, who have extensive experience with crisis services and technical assistance, the TTAC was formed to support the continued growth of the 988 Lifeline and build a more robust crisis care system. And so the goal of our TTAC is to support a crisis care system that is integrated, sustainable, and aligned with evidence-based and evidence-informed practices. Next slide, please. We would also like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our SAMHSA leadership, John Palmieri, Jill Mays, and Tiffany Russell. Next slide, please. Dr. John Palmieri is currently serving as the acting director of the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office within the Office of the Assistant Secretary. He provides lots of subject matter expertise and policy leadership in areas that include crisis response, suicide prevention and interventions, care integration, telehealth implementation, and criminal justice diversion programs. Next slide. Jill Mays is the Division Director of Crisis System Transformation for 988. She currently leads the evolutionary and collaborative work of Pillars 2, Someone to Respond, and 3, A Safe Place for Help, of the 988 Behavioral Health Crisis Continuum. Next slide, please. And then finally, Tiffany Russell is the Chief of Crisis and Justice Initiatives with SAMHSA's 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. She advises the 988 Director and SAMHSA leadership on policies and programs that strengthen coordination between 988 crisis centers, law enforcement, 911 call centers, and emergency medical services. She leads efforts to improve crisis response and access to care for individuals with behavioral health needs, reducing the unnecessary law enforcement involvement, and promoting diversion from the justice system. So we would like to thank, again, our SAMHSA team for their leadership and support. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're really grateful to have this time with you this morning. Over the next hour, we're going to walk through what the Policy Academy is, what we've learned so far, and how it supports continued development across state, territory, and tribal crisis systems. On our agenda is to give a brief overview of this current status of the behavioral health system, We are also very fortunate to be joined today by Chris Soderquist, who will discuss crisis systems design. And then finally, we'll provide that overview of Policy Academy 2026. We're going to go into application and team details and all the logistics that you probably have lots of questions about. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start with the status of behavioral health crisis systems. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Policy Academy exists because we have seen tremendous momentum in the crisis response space since the launch of 988. There's really been rapid growth in terms of new funding, new services, and just a lot of enthusiasm for system transformation. And so what we recognize too is that with growth comes complexity, questions about roles, organizations, and priorities. And so we wanted to take a moment and just address what role states, territories, and tribes play in shaping how 988 integrates into the broader health systems. Um, and really, the local level is where much of the work happens, right? Local systems are answering calls, chats, and text. They're deploying mobile crisis teams. They're coordinating with 911, and they're linking people with ongoing care. We truly do believe that local engagement leads to better outcomes. Um, and just people are better served when their crisis response is rooted in their community. And at the same time, states and territories provide structure, policy, and oversight that help ensure consistency, accountability, and sustainability that is needed to function and to operate a crisis system. So SAMHSA's role is to provide guidance and technical assistance to help align state and local efforts with a shared vision while still allowing for that flexibility that's needed to meet local needs. Next slide, please. Excuse me. This slide outlines a few broad categories of system development. One thing to note is these are not mutually exclusive or rigid. It's likely that most of you will recognize elements of multiple categories within your own systems. And so the Policy Academy is really designed to meet systems where they are, whether foundational, defined, or optimized, and help each one take the next step toward a stronger, more coordinated response, crisis response. So for instance, for foundational systems, it provides structure, expert guidance, and peer support to build coordination, accountability, and buy-in across partners. For some of those defined systems, it helps align policies, strengthen oversight, and leverage new opportunities like 988 funding to connect services and move toward full integration or other steps. And then even for those optimized systems, it offers a platform for continuous improvement, refining performance measures, advancing innovation, and sharing best practices nationally. So really to sum that up, Policy Academy aims to give every system, no matter its starting point, the tools, the relationships, the direction needed to strengthen crisis response and sustain long-term progress. Next slide, please. The information that you're seeing here comes from NAMI. As you can see, in terms of state 988 legislation, some states have implemented 988 fee legislation as permitted through the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act. Other states have pursued alternative funding approaches to sustain and expand their crisis services. I think when we're looking at this snapshot, the important takeaway here for us is to know that there's no one-size-fits-all model. Each state is really finding its own way to ensure that crisis services remain strong and sustainable. Next slide, please. And here you'll see a map, also from NAMI, where really we're seeing that across the country, we're seeing remarkable progress. Many states have advanced legislation and appropriations that expand crisis services and strengthen 988 implementation. And organizations like NAMI have tracked this growth. And the data clearly shows the rapid acceleration in investment and innovation across the crisis system. And this momentum is really encouraging and inspiring and is helping to build capacity. Encourage you if you have additional questions about this or would like more information to refer to their website for additional details. Next slide, please. Okay. Of course, progress always brings challenges too, right? Progress is great. It's been wonderful to see, and we also want to recognize that there are challenges to be addressed as well. Among those most common challenges that we see are data alignment. So, for instance, what is being tracked by whom and what is shared? And is there any consistency there that allow us to um, uh, understand measures and have a clear picture of how systems are working? Another challenge is coordination and communication. So, this is a national initiative, right, that has really taken off. And so clarifying authority and strengthening partnerships and really understanding who's speaking with who and how that communication and coordination is happening presents a challenge. Of course, navigating regulatory environments. We want to make sure that systems align and stay aligned with state laws and realities. So these are just kind of a snippet of topics that we expect to explore in greater depth at the Policy Academy. These are common issues that are identified that we want teams who join the Policy Academy to understand on their own level and what the challenges are, and then working towards a solution to address them. Next slide, please. So yeah, challenges can be identified, and our TTAC is the continues to partner with states, territories, and tribes to help support system development and transformation and help address some of these challenges that we just discussed. We help identify shared challenges. We helped highlight promising practices. And then we make those really important connections with peers across jurisdictions where we can help foster shared learning and growth from lessons learned and examples of things that are going well, things that perhaps haven't gone well, and really enable systems to use that knowledge to make improvements. Of course, organizations like NASHFID are also key partners in this learning ecosystem. And really, it's about coming together and helping to create a coordinated and data-driven crisis response system that works for all. Next slide, please. Okay, the next portion of this webinar is going to provide an overview or preview, sort of what's to come at the Policy Academy, focusing on systems design and transformation. As I mentioned at the top, we are so happy to have Chris Soderquist here with us, who brings deep expertise in systems thinking and has worked directly with our past Policy Academy gatherings with SAMHSA and the 988 office. He really does have a gift for translating complex system dynamics into practical and actionable insights. And we are so excited to have him as part of Policy Academy once again. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Lydia. I'm going to hit the share button here and see if we can get the share thing happening. Well, good morning, everybody. And I am honored as well to be here. So I just want to, get the disclaimer out of the way at the beginning, and kind of move on. So my role and expertise is around systems transformation. I've worked with a lot of organizations, as you can see here, and I've been doing it for like 30 years. So that's why I have less hair and it's all gray and white now. And what I'd like to do is to kind of start off with the context here in terms of what we're dealing with, what you all are dealing with and working on and addressing. And this is all from a book called Generations by Jean Twenge, and she's looking at prior to COVID, the rates at which anxiety and depression were rising, particularly among children and youth. And I'm doing work right now with the state of Washington on children and youth behavioral health. And as you can see, a lot of the cases were, fairly normal and stasis, right, in equilibrium. And then there was this hockey stick that occurred around 2012. And whether you're looking at anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, or any of those things, they tend to have this increasing pattern even prior to COVID. So you can't even say that the issues that are associated with behavioral mental health actually are a result of COVID. COVID exacerbated them, but they were happening prior to that. So if we want to create systems transformation, I'm going to use this metaphor and just answer this question silently because we're not in a room and you can't shout it out. But answer this question: what's the cause of this behavior? Right. So take a second to think about that. What's the cause of this behavior? Right. So many of you have probably thought that the answer was gravity, the cause. Others may have thought removing the hand. And I'm going to hold up another system here. I'm going to hold it, and I'm not wearing, any rubber boots here or anything. All right. Administer the same input, and gravity is still operating. So gravity and removing the hand are necessary, but insufficient for the cause of the behavior. The cause of the behavior is the structure of the system itself. This is an oscillation looking for a place to happen. And the point of this is that oftentimes we have mental models about the cause of an issue being something like gravity, which is something we can't change. Or sometimes we say that the problem of the system performing is those idiots or problems over there, right? We blame it on someone else, rather than saying, well, what is the system and the structure? And if you have a mental model of how the system is organized, and by the system that you're talking about is what groups and organizations are working in the system, what people, what decisions, what resources are available, what's this current level of stigma in the system, and other kinds of things like that. If you understand how the system is functioning, you can then make improvements and transform the system so that you can get the behavior you're looking for. So what systems transformation is all about is helping you and those that you work with to see the system, to understand why it's generating the performance it's currently generating, and how do we change that system structure, how we work together differently, how we have different resources, how we focus on different parts of the system. In other words, how do we do that in a way by seeing it to actually get the results we're looking for? So what I'm going to do right now is to talk about what are the components of that system. And then when we get together, next March, we can talk about what are some ways to actually transform those components. So again, keep that slinky in mind as we go forward here. So if the oscillation that you're looking to improve is percentage of people in crisis, mental and behavioral health crisis, and it's been exponentially growing, and in the future you want to see it come down, then in order to do that, again, you need to organize and to work with different groups, organizations, departments, divisions, folks within the system. That is the ecosystem. So identifying the ecosystem is important, understanding who the roles and the players are, how they're approaching it, what decisions are made, and what's the power and relationship dynamics. All of that helps you to actually generate and transform that system so that it creates this learning system. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do you create and orchestrate a learning process in such a system? I'm sure glad the whole isn't in our end. What you'll often find in systems are folks who are focusing so much on what they're working on that they don't see how they're all interdependent on each other, and how do we work on that. And so part of the goal of leadership is to identify the issues or what we're signing up for by not collaborating more effectively. The types of issues that we try to solve, we tend to think of them as a one size fits all, and we just apply the same approach to it. It turns out that there's actually two different types of problems. What often happens is we try to solve the more challenging problems by using a more routine approach. A routine problem is something where there is an identified, easily defined diagnosis of what's going on, why it's happening. There's a proven solution, and there's often an expert who can fix it. So if I fall down and break my knee today, I can't fix it, but there is an expert who can follow a process. That's an emergency room. There's a doctor and a nursing team. They do the x-rays, they set my knee, they give me some instructions, and I go home. So it's a routine in that there's a routine to solve it. We like to come up with routines to solve problems. Just like with COVID, a routine approach to that was developing the mRNA vaccine, which was, again, very, very effective. But that was only part of the process. So only a few experts could do it. They followed the scientific method and the pharmaceutical method, and they developed that. Great. However, there are other issues and problems that are adaptive challenges, and adaptive challenges are often hard to define. There's no expert out there that has the solution, although many of people on Sunday morning talk shows claim they've got solutions for these kinds of things. But there's no expert, there's no clear solution, and there's no routine. So again, back to COVID, we created the vaccine. That was a routine fix to the routine aspects of that problem. However, getting society and the people to actually take it, there was a lot of issues around misinformation, disinformation, miscommunication, lack of trust, and a whole bunch of other adaptive challenges that actually prevented that routine fix from being applied. Those are adaptive challenges, and they're fundamentally different from routine problems. If you're facing a routine problem, just get to work, go do it, solve it. When you're facing an adaptive challenge, you need to orchestrate learning. You need to learn how that system works, including the soft variables like trust and stigma, and morale, and other kinds of things. You need to understand it, and you need to address it. And without that learning mindset, it's going to be really hard to solve problems. So Ron Heifetz, who came up with the field of adaptive leadership, says someone exercising leadership is orchestrating the process of getting factions with competing definitions of the problem to start learning from one another. That's leadership. That's adaptive leadership, and it's sorely lacking in a lot of different areas. I just watched a video interview by Dr. Ashish Jha, who's the dean at the Brown Medical School, talking about children and youth behavioral health. And he says at the very end of it that what we need are leaders and leadership principles, and they're not easy fixes. And he was talking about adaptive leadership as the approach to solve these problems. So that's what you're up to if you're trying to solve and work on these problems, is you are going to have to apply adaptive leadership. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what that means. And then at the conference, we will talk about actually how do you do it. If you read this cartoon real quick, I'll give you a second or two to kind of read through it. You can see what's going on. Again, in a system, we often tend to see the problem as someone over there, as opposed to getting up on the balcony and seeing it as an interdependent system and figuring out how we all need to work and coordinate together. So part of adaptive leadership is getting up on the balcony, seeing down, and being able to figure out how this all ties together and find ways to improve the way people, resources, assets, decisions are made in the system. So if you think about groups and organizations, factions needing to learn together, here's where it becomes challenging, right? You've got these different groups, and they're all working on their own parts of the system, and they're all having goals around different things they're doing. I'm working on getting housing and addressing homelessness. I'm working over here on food and food insecurity. I'm working over here on creating access so that people can have access to funding or federal funding, which unfortunately is drying up, things like that. What do you do? How do you address those kinds of things? People are working on those. And what you really need to be able to do is, again, as I said, orchestrate this learning process, see how, one group is impacting another group, and then how another group is impacting another group, et cetera. Often groups are working at suboptimal goals, again, making sense within their part of the system. However, what often happens is achieving like one goal or working on something that's sort of meaningful and your ideal within your part of the system may actually make it harder for other groups to also function or to work well. We call this accidental adversaries. And accidental adversaries get sets up a lot between sort of state and federal. between federal, state level, and local levels. They often tend to get at these sort of like inability to function and actually create some problems for each other. So how do you identify where that's occurring? And again, get rid of those accidental adversaries and turn them back into very conscious collaborators. That's what we're looking for. And that's the process of adaptive leadership. And we're going to again talk about some of the tools and skills that you can apply to do that in the system. So this is why it's messy. So kind of close out with sort of general categories of areas that you need to work on in order to improve the system. So if we talk about the system being this slinky, what are some of the major components of it that you need to work on? How do you actually identify those and work on those? So at the very top level is where we like to work. We like to focus in on allocating and changing resources. We'd like to change policies. We want to have different investments and processes put in place. One sort of hint that you're working on an adaptive challenge is it doesn't seem to get fixed. And so what you do is you reorganize. And then that doesn't seem to fix it, so you reorganize again. That's the kind of thing where you're focusing in on sort of this strategy, this system of systems level. And again, if you do a good job of that, you can make some changes, but it's insufficient. So just focusing on infrastructure and investments at the national, state, and local level, again, very important, but it's insufficient to make the major changes that you're trying to get. You also need to involve in the private sector and then think about how to coordinate that more effectively. So that's kind of thinking about sort of the system of systems, and this is where our minds go when we talk about systems. But there's another component of it, and that's the relationships and the power dynamics. Who's got the information? Who's got the incentives? Who's not sharing and sharing? How well do these groups work together? And that's the human side of things. And we often overlook that human side of things. Who's making the decisions? Who's left out of those decisions? How is information generated? Are we getting lived experience in there when we think about making decisions? Why are some groups marginalized and not included? So if you really want to make changes, you can't just try to change the structure of the system at the top. You also need to change the relationships and the power dynamics. And they need to understand and identify again where those are getting in the way. We'll talk about how to do that again at the session in March. So the final component, and this kind of ties it all together, is if you think about what do you see here? So if you're like most people, you see a deer and an elephant and a giraffe. I just got back from Kenya, so I saw some of these things, up close and personal. If you then look at this one and say, what do you see? Many people see a seal, a goose. There's geese that walk out in front of my yard all the time. The dog likes to eat their waste, sadly, and penguins, right? So you see a bunch of different things here. Now you see that they're different based upon the perspective you take. And this is, again, very important because when we want to actually see and understand a system, we often say, well, I see it this way. And somebody else, oh, you're wrong. I see it this way. As opposed to how are what we all seeing together part of this system? And it's our mental models. So people and groups within a system have mental models. And those mental models determine how people work together, the relationships and the power dynamics, and those mental models determine the systems that we put in place, the decisions that we make. So how do we surface and understand the mental models that are in the system? And that's the underlying, that's the secret sauce, so to speak, because it's our thinking about what's important, our way we evaluate things, what we try to achieve, our mental maps of like how reality works or doesn't work, our set of assumptions. Groups in a system have different sets of assumptions, different beliefs, different perspectives and worldviews. Till we can get at and surface those, it's going to be really hard to address the power and the relationship dynamics, and it's going to be really hard to generate, collective decisions that people can make and create positive results. So ecosystem transformation, this is where it gets challenging. It requires us who are trying to transform those systems to see all of these together. So how are people making decisions? who's left in, who's left out, and where might our assumptions about how the world works be wrong. All of those things need to be looked at and addressed simultaneously. So seeing them all simultaneously is what I would consider adaptive leadership, how to help people see them all simultaneously. So those are the components of structure. And so the system that's generating what you don't like, if we change the system of systems, that's going to help. Changing and understanding the relationships and power dynamics is going to help. But if we change the mental models, we can change all of that. So how do we surface what the mental models are in the system? So this is where coordination and, again, orchestrating a process of learning comes in. So if you want to try to change something and learn, if you want to try to understand how something works, the best way to learn about it, according to Kurt Lewin, is to try and change it. So you're in the actual process of trying to change how these systems work. So you're going to, as you do it, if you're orchestrating a process of learning, help people to see how that system works so that you can change it and transform it. So in doing so, you can use sort of an agile leadership approach, which we can talk about a little bit more again in person. And then there are tools that you can use. So we'll talk about some systems mapping. How do you map out the systems in place? And here's an example that I did with the 988 team at SAMHSA, looking at sort of how do they orchestrate both the 988 line as well as referrals back up into a process where groups are supported. Then you can use maps to kind of look at the relationships in the system and figure out like how those are. So we'll talk about these different tools and how you can use and apply them to orchestrate learning. And then again, how do you use the adaptive learning skills to surface the systems that are in play? There's conversational capacity, which we spent some time at the last session talking about, because that gets at the heart of accidental adversaries. And how do you apply an improvisational learning approach? So I apologize for sort of that spew of like information. I hope that provides sort of a conceptual framework for what we'll be up to, and we'll be working more on the how and giving you time in groups to start practicing and applying these skills both in person and then develop a plan for how to actually start applying and working on them after the session. But that's about all I have for now. So we can take questions now or later, whenever it makes sense in your schedule.
Thank you for that, Chris. That really gets me excited about what's to come at Policy Academy, and it's a lot of great information. We encourage you to ask questions. If you have any, feel free to um, raise your hand, come off mute, put it in the chat. I'll give like a minute for anyone who would like to do that. Or perhaps like me, questions come later, so you might think of it as we're moving along, and feel free to use the chat feature. All right, I don't see anyone coming off mute, so we'll go ahead and proceed, but we'll keep an eye on the chat, and I've got my lovely colleagues in the background answering, so thank you for that, and thank you again, Chris. So yeah, let's take the time now to really talk specifics about Policy Academy 2026. You just got a preview about some of the sessions that we plan to have there, some of the focus areas. So let's talk more in depth about what this is and what you can expect. So just to sum it up, the objective of the Policy Academy is to support states, territories, tribes, and tribal organizations in coalition building, role clarity, and applications of systems engineering or design principles to develop and improve coordinated crisis systems, policies, and practices. We want to help you improve your systems and are excited for this opportunity. Next slide, please. So really you can think of the Policy Academy as having like three main components. There's the preparation stage. So we will host an orientation to Policy Academy webinar to the selected groups. We will then also host virtual technical assistance planning meetings with team facilitators with a very dedicated team for each group to start that work ahead of our convening, really assessing, taking a look at the system, starting to think about challenges, strengths, opportunities, and really starting to kind of shape what each applicant, each entity would like to sort of take away from the Policy Academy convening, um, which is our second component. So this is the 2-day in-person Policy Academy convening, which this year will be held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, March 10th through 11th. We're really looking forward to this. Yes, shout out to Wisconsin. We're looking forward to this. We will have a bit more information about this coming up. And then the third component is the follow-up component. So the work does not end at Policy Academy. We provide follow-up virtual technical assistance meetings and in-person site visits. So think about the preparation to get us ready for Policy Academy convening. The Policy Academy convening really being a space where a lot of shared learning is happening. You're meeting with other teams, you're meeting with subject matter experts, and then you take what you learned in that space and follow up in terms of whatever goals and plans you set in place, and you have a consultant, a partner there with you to help you connect to resources, to help you with technical assistance, and to then ultimately do a site visit and provide that really tailored support. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of an application, like we are looking for teams, very specific teams to apply for this, and those teams will have to fulfill several commitments. I just sort of talked through them, but wanted to highlight them again, just so everyone has a clear understanding of what the expectations are of the program. So I mentioned that there'll be a webinar that right now that's scheduled for December 2nd. Again, those pre-convening meetings are really important. You're going to have to initiate a work group to attend those meetings and attend at least 3 of those planning meetings. We found that that's a good number to get us oriented and start thinking about what your system's needs are. And then, of course, attend 2-day convening in Milwaukee. You will designate a travel team of 8 members to participate in that in-person meeting. And there you'll finalize and commit to a work plan that will then carry over into the follow-up where you will meet with one-on-one virtual technical assistance meetings with your group. And ultimately host a site visit. So that's sort of the trajectory of the Policy Academy plan. Next slide, please. Team composition is very important to the success of the Policy Academy initiative. So the team should really represent a broad spectrum of cross-system leadership from various agencies, organizations, and state, county, tribal, and local entities to really ensure that we have comprehensive representation and different perspectives, that the teams that are engaging in this are able to represent different aspects of the crisis system. Ideally, the team should consist of 8 to 20 individuals. And then just a reminder that 8 of those team members would be required to do the travel to the in-person Policy Academy. Next slide, please. So really more about the team composition. To give a bit more specifics, and all of this information, it can also be found in the application itself. But we do require that every team include at least one representative from the state, county, territory, Tribal Mental Health Authority. Really wanting to make sure that folks are there who can influence the system in terms of policy or funding or any other way. Um, we want to make sure that those folks are involved so that they can be part of discussions, part of the understanding of the system assessment and needs. And then in addition to that required role, teams are strongly encouraged to include representation from um, those sectors listed right there, which are single state agencies for substance use, state Medicaid authority, persons with lived experience or firsthand experience, and supporting youth in crisis, 988 center leadership, mobile crisis providers, behavioral health youth experts, CCBHCs, judicial and law enforcement leaders. So really think about the entire system. And we encourage you to have representation from those fields. And then additional team members, we have a list here as well from those relevant fields and sectors. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are certainly suggestions that we feel would be beneficial to include. So we're talking, state public health agencies, PSAPs, hospitals and healthcare systems, elected officials, decision makers. We want them, if possible, at the table so that they have an understanding of what the needs are. Suicide prevention organizations. We're really going to encourage you to think about your needs, your systems, and who to invite to be a part of this larger team. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the in-person convening, we do have 2 days together. We got a little taste of what you can expect with Chris's presentation, but some topics that we'll be covering is systems design, right? Funding infrastructure and sustainability, how to optimize crisis systems to meet the different needs of all individuals, addressing unique needs of youth in crisis, integration of substance use, misuse, and substance use disorder care in crisis response models, workforce strategies, and in terms of development, training, recruitment, support, expansion initiatives. Um, We'll have larger discussions, presentations from subject matter experts, and we'll also have team discussions to prioritize and strategize within teams and with support from a consultant and also a subject matter expert as well. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Erica, who will let us know more about the location and date.
Thank you. Hello. Yes, so we will be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, March 10th and 11th. And we will have, so March 10th and 11th will be full day conference events. For those traveling, you'll want to plan in. Normally we have our travel day as the day before, which would be March 9th. Everybody would arrive in Milwaukee and get checked into your hotel. The 10th would be a full day conference from like 8 until 5. Same thing for the 11th. And then we plan another travel day on the 12th for everyone to return home after the conference. And with regards to travel, we will help you with all of those arrangements once you're selected as a team. So hotel, air travel will all be facilitated and organized through our team. So that's how you'll get to Milwaukee for 2 wonderful days in March. Hopefully it'll be as sunny and as bright as the picture listed here, but very much excited to welcome everyone to Milwaukee. Next slide, please. So Application components. We've just opened the actual application cycle, so the form is live and you're available to go in and take a look at it. I've placed the link in the chat for you to preview and take a look at. But you'll have to find or identify one primary contact or organizer. And this will be the point person that we'll use to kind of funnel a lot of information through. We'll reach out to with questions regarding the team as a whole. We'll use them kind of as initially the person that all of the information will flow through, acceptance, initial kind of confirmation with the team once the application has gone into being reviewed and accepted. You'll be asked for your goals for participation. So that'll be kind of like a free writing section that you'll place in there. And then readiness and capacity for systems improvement and technical assistance needs. So also other questions that you'll be asked about your project and how to analyze what you're looking to get out of the Policy Academy. We also then have a state, tribe, territory self-evaluation. So this will be general questions about the state of your crisis system in general. This will not be used as part of the evaluation process, but just something to kind of give your team a place to start, something that you can refer to when you start working together in your virtual meetings. And then a team roster of 8 to 20 people. So the application is set up that you will have to list a minimum of 8 people on your team and up to 20 people. So we do recommend, I would say, fill out as many people as you possibly can in the beginning. You will be given, once the acceptance goes through and you're invited into the Policy Academy, there will be opportunities for you to fill out your team more. And just to clarify that those 8 people that you initially submit are not required to be your travel team. You'll be asked to solidify your travel team later on, but just that minimum of 8 is where we're going to be. The application won't allow you to submit until you have a minimum of 8 people. And we do recommend that you have, conversations with your team, your extended partners before you submit them so that they know that they are being submitted as part of a team. But that's the roster portion of the application phase. Next slide, please. So here is a brief look at the application timeline. These are just sort of the highlights of the due dates that we have. So the application is open now through September 7th. So feel free to submit at any point going forward, but those applications that'll close on November 7th. And then November 24th is when we will reach out to all the teams to let and invite those who have been accepted into the Policy Academy. And then December 2nd is our kickoff orientation meeting. And this is where a lot of the logistics notes get passed on. You'll meet your facilitators. We'll talk about deadlines for travel, process for travel, all of those setting up of the 3 virtual meetings in advance of the Policy Academy. So all that gets rolled out in that orientation meeting on December 2nd. And then January 15th is sort of the cutoff for the finalization of who your travel team is going to be. So you'll have a little bit of time in there to do some substitutions or move things around as you decide who you would like to send to Milwaukee in March. And then March 10th and 11th, you'll be in Milwaukee having the Policy Academy. Next slide, please. And along with the link for the application in the chat, here is a QR code if you'd like to grab that on your phone as well. But hopefully that you can get started on your application now, and please feel free to reach out to anybody in the TTAC if you have questions about what is needed or requirements or application, any application questions you might have. Next slide, please. So next, as part of our Policy Academy kind of introduction, we'd like to bring back a guest from a team who was at Policy Academy 2025 this past March. to talk a little bit about her team and everything that they did and experienced, a little bit about, like their goals and what they were able to get out of attending Policy Academy as a bit of a testimonial. So I'd like to bring up Catherine Cox from the New Hampshire team.
Erica, I appreciate that. You can take down the slides if you'd like. I don't have any slides associated with my part, but I thought I could just give you a few highlights of what our experience has been and walk you through how our team addressed the issues that we wanted to resolve, or at least start to like noodle through using the resources of Policy Academy. So we, our starting point, like when we wanted to go ahead and apply, we sort of entered in with a pretty strong foundation of our crisis system. Even before the national launch of 988, our state had already been in motion to creating a centralized access point and statewide mobile crisis teams that were dispatched across the lifespan. So our participation was really about moving from a strong foundation toward better alignment, integration of substance use into our crisis system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then also improved data, maybe transparency isn't the right word, but better understanding of not just the public facing data that we're preparing in terms of volume into our crisis center, call centers and mobile crisis dispatches, but also the finer data points that we really want to use for quality improvement that we just don't quite have yet. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the key challenges we were hoping to address using Policy Academy was the multiple access points. So we still have a 10-digit number for our statewide access point to receive mobile crisis dispatching. And we have a warm handoff process from any calls, texts, or chats going into 988 to our access point. So that we just wanted to like start to address, because I think our vision is towards one number for everything. And so Policy Academy really helped kind of center some of like the systems thinking that we needed to bring our partners along for on how we could achieve that. We have separate systems addressing mental health crisis and substance use crisis, and we have been trying to figure out how we could operate those in more alignment and integration so that we could really, we know that people don't live single issue lives. And so we don't want to have these like single issue crisis systems. So that was one of the main tenets as well. But it's always complicated by the fact that we have separate funding streams and contracts and funding timelines and things. So how we step towards that and strategize that was really critical. We have some data fragmentation that was happening. It lives in multiple systems, so it's very difficult to see how someone can flow through our system. And then just like the governance and coordination that it takes to kind of do that relationship building, trust building, and having multiple stakeholder groups and different types of steering committees that all sort of have oversight over parts of crisis system or parts of it. And so one of our goals was to map and align those efforts for a more unified approach. So the Policy Academy offered a structure and some accountability. So it was sort of gave us a reason as a state to take a pause and take stock of what's working and then what still needs alignment. And so we had an outstanding facilitator, Stephanie. I know you are somewhere in this Zoom meeting. She really took the time to not just understand our system, but also the context behind it, our approach to contracting, our vision for things, where we are in a state of readiness, understanding our partners and the particular dynamics of our state. So that was really it's been a critical component to kind of keep our eye on the ball and keep us moving. And the facilitation coupled with like that accountability helped us to reflect as a state, both in our travel team that went into the 2-day in person, but also to our larger group, about what progress we're making and and even the small steps, like recognizing that those have been in alignment with the goals that we set in Policy Academy. There's been a lot of like small wins that I think are easy to just like move through and say, oh yeah, like it's just part of the contracting, but it actually stepped us closer to our vision. And so we've taken a lot of those steps that I do believe foundationally were like aligned through the work of Policy Academy. The hardest parts of this are bridging the work from your travel and from your in-person experience back to larger stakeholder groups. So how you create that meaning and set those goals, and then have that post communication aspect and bringing folks back together has been one of the challenges. We also have so many moving parts that are just always moving, especially with the federal funding landscape and our state landscape. It can be really challenging to keep everyone at the same table focused on the same things. But the Policy Academy does help keep that momentum. Having someone that is checking in on you to be like, hey, how are things going? We should convene folks to ask good questions of your progress and of your work, and to keep us on track with the goals and intent, to make sure, are those still the same goals? Are you still headed in that direction? And just that constant, reminder and moment to check in, even when you have competing priorities, which can be really helpful. So looking ahead, we are focused on integrating our behavioral health crisis system. We're looking to improve our in-state 90-day answer rates that can hopefully step us towards having one number in the future, and really deepening our data fragmentation issues to making sure we have a clear picture of what's happening, not just in our someone to talk to pillar, but across all of them. So we're really grateful for our time at Policy Academy and the time that we had with Stephanie. And so we really just, that sort of wraps up sort of my talking points for you all, but I'm happy to field any like specific questions about our experience.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. We're so glad that you had a good experience, and appreciate you sharing your insights. I want to open it up, to folks here in the last few moments that we have together. What other questions do you have that we haven't addressed in the chat or that have come up? Let us know, either by coming off mute or in the chat.
One thing, maybe we could share a little bit about the evaluation process for how the applications are evaluated. Stephanie, would you like to let everybody know what we'll be looking at once the applications get submitted?
Sure, I'd be happy to demystify that evaluation process that'll occur after applications close on November 7th. So we have an internal team of reviewers that will use a predetermined rubric to score each application. There will be multiple reviewers that look at each application, and it's primarily focused on scoring your goals for participation, the readiness and capacity for system improvement and technical assistance needs, and also your team roster. As Erica said, that's a really important component, that we have the appropriate representation on your team roster. I do want to note that we will not be scoring the self-evaluation section. That is that's to your benefit. And if you have any other questions, let me know.
Thank you, Stephanie. Let's go to the next slide. As we're hearing no questions and the chat is quiet as well, I do want to make sure that you have our contact information. So Erica has shared the application several times. You have the link there. But please, if there's any questions that come up after today, perhaps you are viewing this recording after the fact. We understand that not all the teams that are interested could join us today, so we do have this recorded. And if you're reviewing this, watching this, some days or weeks after today, and have questions that came up, please don't hesitate to reach us at support@988crisistttac.org. We will be happy to answer your questions. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending today. Thanks for your participation and your interest in Policy Academy. We're looking forward to hearing from you, from receiving your applications, and just wish you all a great day as you head on with the rest of your day. Thank you.